Tender Strands by Martin Dempsey. Chapter 17. Funnel. Don spat. Most of what came up was gunk and blood. The gunk of the film that had built up in his mouth, the blood from gum decay. Lao didn't mix well with meth either. It was a harsh smoke. Something about Liao rounded out the meth, keeping the full tunneled in effect, but preventing the tunnel vision. It felt like adding milk to one's coffee, ramped up to 1,000, and Don liked it. It allowed him to both hype himself up to roll or grope someone without the nagging anxiety of getting caught, causing him to step on the moment, second-guess himself, and miss a possible window of opportunity. The fire escape steps he was under connected to a patisserie. As he watched the human and vehicle traffic pass by, he would occasionally take a deep breath of the sweet scented air, which smelt of baked goods and sugar, and turn his eyes to gaze at the cream horns, funnel cakes, and other patisseries and cakes laid out in rows behind the shop's logo of a little white cartoon child, opening its mouth wide to take a bite out of a cream cake. This little patch of darkness was a great spot to watch for marks. His favourites were drunks making their way home. Drunks in a small group, 3 or 4, were always a good bet. They had confidence and were extremely easy to follow, and sooner or later they would always peel off and make it abundantly clear that's what they were doing. Then they'd start fiddling for keys or phones or something, totally unaware of who was around them. That's when Don would strike, usually with a quick roundhouse blow to the chin from behind with his brass knuckles. As soon as the mark hit the deck, he'd take their phone, often conveniently in their hand, and search for their wallet or just grab their bag. If it was abroad, he'd grope her first, pulling up or down her top. This wasn't just for his own gratification, although he did get a thrill from it. It was to preoccupy her when she woke up and prevent others from coming to her aid. No one came to the aid of an apparently blackout drunk guy laying in the street, but they would for a lady, unless her top was pulled down, in which case they tended not to for fear of being accused of ulterior motives. People are very easy to manipulate in Don's experience. The trick is just to know what you want from them and what they are to you, and to keep them in that box, and don't let them out. There was a possible mark now. A guy with a top knot for his hair piled up on his head, thin. Hipster glasses. Looked nervy and on edge, while still not being particularly aware of his surroundings. Lone people were usually too aware, but this guy looked like he couldn't put up much of a fight, even if he did realize Don was right behind him and winding up. It was also a quiet night, not surprising for a cold weeknight, and he'd already smoked the last of his stash and wanted to pick up some more to gee him up for tomorrow night, which meant he needed to get at least 20 or so plus another for a burger on the way home. This guy looked like he might have money, just going by the fact his clothes were so casual but he still had labels on them, some kind of male yoga pants with chunks and hippy-dippy type hoodie. Don started to follow him from the opposite side of the street, from about 20 or so yards back. The guy had a cloth backpack, which might have been where he was keeping his wallet, phone, etc. It looked like one of the ones he often saw containing a rolled foam mat. He grabbed that too when he rolled him. They walked together, Don matching the mark's pace, past illuminated shop windows, neon takeout signs, streetlights, waste bins, parked cars, and parking meters. Don kept an eye on the mark's hands. As soon enough, his right one moved to his hip pocket to rummage and withdrew a vape pen. Don would be hoping for a phone or better yet keys. The mark vaped and blew a steam of condensation into the air, then stopped for a second to put the vape back into his hip pocket, and then turned towards a taxi cab garage and entered the customer service area. Don swore under his breath. He's probably going to rent a taxi. That scuppered his chance to jump him unless he came out on his own. Don crossed the street to get a better view of what was at the garage and caught a familiar scent. Liao. The mark had vaped Liao, mixed with some kind of vape juice. Interesting. Don was on the verge of writing the mark off and possibly returning to the spot under the fire escape 3 blocks back, or moving on to another spot outside a nightclub or bar, but this dude was possibly carrying. If it was a taxi garage, through the front shop style window, Don watched his mark walk behind the customer service desk and unlock and enter a door behind it marked private. A thought entered his head, verbalized by his inner voice as a swear word. What if this was a dealer? Don knew from personal experience many taxi drivers had a nice little sideline going in dealing drugs, guns, even girls. This might be more than just an inn or a mark. He might be the lead to a gold mine. Don was perfectly capable of breaking and entering and had done so many times before. Hell, he'd even helped himself to an unconscious Mark's door keys, dragged a woman into her own apartment, had his way, helped himself to her purse and laptop before heading out, locking her inside her own place without a phone, computer, just to slow her down and give her time to have a second doubts about making anything official. If this mug was a driver, and this garage was hot, there could be a stash inside of more than just money. There wasn't anyone behind the front desk, but there was a security camera above it, and there wasn't a till in sight. But there weren't any customers waiting or what looked to be drivers about. Cabs were parked in the front lots, but the main garage door was closed. Don decided to have a look around. If that scrawny dude was the only person in there in that moment, he felt confident in breaking in the back and having a look around. The back was something of a letdown. Only two fire escape doors, both without outside locks. He knew from personal experience that those were a nightmare to kick in, and no windows. He could try and climb up on the roof, hoping to find a skylight, but it looked as if the garage entrance and the customer area were the main ways in and out, and both had cameras. Disappointed, Don took the opportunity to urinate against a wall. As he finished and shook himself, his heel dipped suddenly, and he heard a metallic clang. Looking down, he noticed an old dray entrance for the first time. The garage must have once been a bar, or maybe it once had an active cellar. Maybe it still had one, used for a repair or maintenance pit, or simply storage. Like a stash for Lao. The metal was old, warped, and one of the hatches was unlocked. Dan couldn't believe his luck. Perhaps this was the route by which the goods were dropped off. Maybe there was either a meet, or when was due to go down, or just went down. Maybe the mark was here to arrange one. Don could sleep in and check it out. He trusted himself to handle one hippie, and even whoever else might show up, at least outrun them. He had his brass knuckles and switch knife and claw hammer still on him. Don levered up the metal door slowly and as quietly as possible. It did creak a little, but he was careful not to let it clang when he let it down on the gravelly tarmac. Inside, the hole was jet black. The method filled him with confidence, the Lao with the relaxed self-possession of someone moving and acting in their dreams, once they realized it was a dream. Everything simultaneously felt real and yet comfortably fake, in the way a good film or immersive video game feels. He could handle anything that was down there. Don sat on the edge and then let his legs in. He could make out what he thought was dust down there, so the drop wouldn't be too far. Hanging on the edge, he let himself down. Something soft and flossy suddenly seemed to both give way and embrace him, like the inside of a mattress. It felt the way fiberglass looks, buttery and crispy, all at the same time, but yet smooth and creamy like a high-quality bedsheet. It slowed the descent and then supported him. He could make out in the gloom that his feet were supported just above the concrete ground, and he tried to kick them and wiggle free to meet the floor to stand, but the more he moved, pulled, tugged, and thrashed, the more he seemed to get caught up. Some of it got into his mouth. It tasted bland and had the consistency of candy floss. It was only slightly sticky, but the sheer volume of it was immobilizing. Don tried to thrust his limbs and seesaw his hips, and even his steroid-assisted body was stifled by the substance. Exhausted, Don stopped trying to move and took some deep breaths and tried to assay the situation. His arms were above his head, his legs out, and he was coated in this, whatever it was. He couldn't reach his knife. His fingers were now a good foot away from the hatch above him. He was totally stuck. The stuff didn't seem to give way when he first dropped, though, so maybe if he waited, it would give way further. No one else seemed to be down here, so maybe if he waited. The confidence of the meth hadn't deserted him, so he figured he could even sleep a few hours until the drivers or dealers turned up, and he could just say he'd fallen in, make it their fault until he was in a good place to lay one or more of them out and just leg it. He wasn't uncomfortable. He could just literally hang out for a while. A face appeared suddenly off to the left of his foot, making Don flinch from shock. The pale face of what looked like a small boy. His head was bathed in moonlight, making almost everything about it white. He had curly hair and what seemed to be a headband, also white, supporting a selection of large black glass beads or buttons in a circle around the top of his head. He was peering at his shoes, squinting, short-sighted. He looked like he'd just woken up and wasn't quite with it, like he needed to rub his eyes. "Hey, kid! Kid!" Don barked. The eyes gained a little bit of focus, and blinked, and looked up. Widened. "Kid, get me the fuck out of here, you hear me? Get your father or some scissors or something." The small head moved, rapidly, suddenly, upwards, like the kid had just run up a stepladder. But there was no ladder there. If there were, Don's kicking legs would surely have felt it. The boy's head was now level with Don's own. He was looking right at him again. Less in confusion, more like he was trying to take in the situation, as if he couldn't quite believe his eyes, or if this was the first time something important he'd been waiting for had happened, as if this was his cue to do something he'd never done before, but which was of utmost importance. "Ooh, ooh, ooh." The boy's mouth made an ooh shape, and he started making excited noises. He had a fur jacket on or something. There was a ruff of fur around his neck. "Listen, kid, listen. You need to go get somebody to get me out of here. Now. I mean it." "Oh, oh, 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 wow," the little boy said, his eyes growing wide with delight and shock, like he'd pulled the wrapping off a present he'd gotten just what he'd always wanted. Then something happened to the boy's lower jaw. The chin parted and opened outwards, and two long black daggers pointed towards the trapped monster. Dream Journal, August 20th. Pink Floyd, Tannis root, cannabis, 5-HTP, yoga session for 60 minutes. I dreamt I was at a fun fair. All around me was a whirl of giddy attendees and organ music. I joined a line to visit a face painter who was wearing a tall black top hat. There are 5 people in the line in front of me. The face painter makes them up in turn. The first was a policeman with a comically large handlebar moustache. The second was made to look like a detective, complete with a painted monocle. The third was a nurse with a face mask and heightened eyelashes. The final child was made to look like a skeleton. In the end, the face painter had to sit me down and asks me, what would I like to be painted as? Before I could answer, he interrupted me to say, "Be warned, my dear, the masks we wear can come to dictate our whole lives." And I woke immediately, shivering in the dark.